So the following problem says how much 2% acid must be mixed with 10% acid so that we can get 500 milliliters of 5% acid. Well, you got to think about what's happening. What you're doing is you've got two different types of liquid. One is a liquid that has 2% acid in it, and then we're going to add that to a liquid that has 5% acid, and that's going to equal, 10% acid, and that's going to equal a liquid that has 5%. So we're going to put a certain amount of 2%, a certain amount of 10%, and that's going to equal a certain amount, an acid of solution with a certain amount of 5%. Now, what we do know, we also have this piece of information. The 5% is 500 milliliters. So we know when it comes to the amount of acid, we know that it's going to be 500 milliliters. So the question is, what don't we know? Well, it says how much 2% acid and how much 10% solution acid must be mixed together. So we don't know how much 2%, we don't know how much 10%. So let's go ahead and let X equal our amount of 2%. And then instead of doing Y or something like that for the amount of 10%, we're going to do 500 minus X. Because the total amount of acid used is, that's 10%, not 100%. The total amount of acid used is 500 milliliters. So if X is the amount of 2%, then X plus something has to equal 500. So if we just subtract X from both sides, and that something is 500 minus X. Or you can think about adding these two together, X plus 500 minus X, the X's would cancel, you have 500. So now we write an equation on these mixture problems. Always write it in terms of the hard chemical. In this case, it's acid. So how much acid do we have in this first thing? Well, we have X milliliters, and 2% of it is acid. And so what we're going to do is we need to multiply X times 2%. So we're going to have 0.02 times X. Then we need to multiply 0.10, right? 10% versus 0.10 times the amount in our second container, which that is 500 minus X. And that's got to equal the amount of acid in our other container, which is 0.05 times 500. So this is the 0.02x is the amount of acid in the first, 1 times 500 minus x is the amount of acid in the second, and that has to add together to equal the amount of acid in the third. So we go through, we do our multiplication. We're going to have 0.02x plus 500 times 0.1. When we do 500 times 0.1, that equals 50. 10% of 500 is 50, so it's going to be plus 50 minus 0.1x or 0.10x. And that's going to equal, well, 5% of 500 is 250. Not 250, 25. So you need to add things together. 0.02x minus 0.1x give you negative 0.08x. 0.02 plus a negative 0.1, you can do this plus a negative, is 0.08. And then that's plus 50 equals 25. We're going to subtract 50 from both sides. And that's going to leave us with 0.08x, a negative, equals, well, 25 minus 50 is a negative 25. So to solve it, all we've got to do is divide by a negative 0.08. So x equals, well, it's going to be 25 divided by a negative 0.08, which turns out to be 312.5. So the amount of 2% acid is 312.5. The amount of, that's milliliters, 2%. The amount of 5% or 10% is going to be 500 minus 312, which turns out to be 187.5. And this is milliliters for both these. So you end up with 500 milliliters of 10%. So you have two answers. The two answers are 187.5 and 312.5.